So now we have extra 15 minutes for a question from the audience. So if someone wants to ask a question, it's time. Yannick.
Thank you, Professor Sadurski. I know we have a shy audience, so let me be the first one who will ask a question. In Israel nowadays, we speak a lot about the Polish salami and what the protests are saying. The protest is saying that we cannot allow any change whatsoever because this would be just the first step in the long, as you mentioned, incremental other steps. And I want to ask you, is really everything a salami? Because if everything is a salami, so we can't do anything, because everything is a small piece. How do we know which piece is part of the salami, which piece is not part of the salami? Whether the salami is actually good, I don't know. What can we learn from the Polish experience about this? If the government is saying, let's pause for now, is it okay, is it not okay? How do we know?
Well, that's of course the most important problem. And putting aside the fact that perhaps if we are talking about Polish meat, we should talk about Polish kielbasa rather than salami, because salami is more Hungarian. Right? But indeed, for the reasons which I had presented, that is that populist authoritarianism occurs, comes to power in this incremental way. We have a situation where it's very difficult to identify a point, because I understand, Yannick, that you are looking for this red line. Where is the point where you can say, no, that's already dangerous? Other things we may disagree, we may look, okay, they have changed this or that, but we can always find some analogies in unquestionably democratic states for similar things, so maybe they are not that toxic. I would say that. I don't believe that there is any, when you look, for example, at my decalogue from which I began, that there is any simple point which you may say, that's where the point of no return happened. You have to look at comprehensively at the interactions between these different changes. But if I had really to identify red lines, I would say there are two. One is about media. When you spread the control of media, then democracy is gone. You know? And of course we may disagree what really counts as governmental control of media. But, and there may be reasonable disagreement among people about that. But once you can see that media, either for economic reasons or for fear of legal harassment or whatever, they start to run the line of the government only, then a point has been crossed. And you may say, well, we are now on the way towards dictatorship. And the second point, of course, are courts. And when we look at courts, we in particular look at not just courts, but those institutions which are crucial in appointment of judges. I mean, if you look at my description in this first book I mentioned of the so-called National Council of Judiciary in Poland, then what happened there was almost identical at what is being debated now in Israel about the Committee of Judicial Appointment. Almost identical. They have changed in an unconstitutional way the composition of the Council of Judiciary in a way that the parliamentary majority has a majority on this body. That was enough. Once they have it, they will be able to appoint their own judges. Once they appoint their own judges, they can do whatever they want. There will be no invalidations of bad laws, no prosecutions of people in power, etc. So this is a central body. It's also difficult because for many citizens, this is a body somewhere in the shadow. You understand what the court is. But Committee of Judicial Appointments, it even doesn't fit a banner in the demonstration, protest. But it's a crucial body. So I say these are two red lines in this salami.
Witamy pana profesora na świętej ziemi.
Dziękuję bardzo.
We welcome you on the Holy Land.
Dziękuję. Bardzo dobrze być tutaj.
And now, as a foreign or international observer, comparing the Polish case,
I will be very curious to learn your opinion. What is very important is, of course, the motivation of the whole process, the reasoning. Unlike in Poland, the case in Israel is the motivation to a great extent is based on nationalistic messianism or messianic nationalism. If this is the motto or credo of the Israeli case, how would you, as a foreign observer, advisor, how would you take care of it?
Okay, my answer will be quite simple here. If you think about motivations of the leader, so you ask yourself, just like probably in Israel, you ask yourself, what are the motivations of Netanyahu? I won't enter into that. But when I'm thinking about what are motivations of Jarosław Kaczynski, whom I personally know, I would say pure cynicism. No messianism, no nationalism. He doesn't believe he would be completely cosmopolitan if that earned him prolongation of power. So the way he reads Polish society, unfortunately correctly, is that there is a big demand for this type of nationalism and alliance with the Roman Catholic Church, which you must know is the most backward, most reactionary Catholic Church all over the world, that repays him. So he's completely cynical. That is only power aggrandizement. Now, what are the motivations of his followers? That's another question. Part of the motivation, because they have already created their own, to use Hungarian sociologist Balint Magyar's concept, mafia state. They have created mafia state. So many people and their families are now have their self-interest in perpetuation of power. So don't look for any messianism or any higher emotions there. This is just maintain their privileges and also their impunity, which they would risk if the current opposition came to power. But obviously there is a very strong segment of, say, I don't want to sound disrespectful, but it is a sociological fact of less educated, less affluent people, especially in the countryside, etc., who feel very strong nationalistic and xenophobic feelings, and for whom you may very easily activate whenever there is a new migration risk. I mean, anti-immigrants, anti-refugees card is something that this government plays whenever they are at risk of losing popularity or power, and I bet that they will do it before October election. Actually, they started already making noises about how Poland is now being threatened by so-called compulsory relocation of illegal immigrants. Compulsory relocation of illegal immigrants. 4 words, 4 lies. But they will be lying like that until the elections.
Thank you. I think we could see this law that the Polish government managed to put through, which is saying that Poles collaborated with the Nazis is defamation, etc. And it's already caused some tension with Israel in that respect, except to the Bibi. I think your first decalogue should be taken out of his book, main page. What I wanted to say is that I think what's missing here is mass manipulation, deceit. This is deceit on a mass scale. That is the ability to lie. And the people will believe you without, they lose all their senses altogether. And I think this already, we see this in 1984, with George Orwell. The language itself, I don't know how we call it, new talk. The language itself is new speech. The language itself, which is the communication between people, itself is corrupted in such a way that it becomes useless.
Yes, I agree fully with what you have just said. There is a beautiful book written by my friend and colleague, Professor Andras Sajo of Hungarian Central European University, called Ruling by Lying. And that's the title expresses one of the main characteristics of the authoritarian populism. Deceit, a lie, is a socio-technical instrument. I actually devote some time to it, some pages in my second book in this pandemic academic of populism, about what are the functions of lies. Functions of lies in a system such as Poland and Hungary is not so much to convince people to something that is untrue. It is rather to create people, to create certain unity, certain solidarity of deceit. Yes, we agree to a fundamental big lie, and therefore we are insider, we are accomplice to a lie. So one is about the so-called, conspiracy that resulted in the air crash of 10th of April 2010, with President and 94 other people died. Another is something that you mentioned, the law which would punish people, including historians, including journalists, etc., for attributing Polish nation complicity in the Holocaust. And even though this law has been dropped, at least as a criminal law, it still remains as a civil remedy. And you are right, it was dropped after sort of discreet, behind the scenes consultations with Netanyahu government. And Netanyahu's part of the deal was that he agreed to the use of the concept of anti-Polonism, which are allegedly symmetrical to anti-Semitism. Nevertheless, now it returns through the policy of Minister of Education, who said, and who acted on it by saying, I am not going to give money to the institutions which defame Poland. And for him, Polish historians of Holocaust, such as Barbara Eckelking and Jan Grabowski, who are really people of great integrity, are attacked by the government, and the institutions, Polish institutions in which they work, are being denied funding, because these are institutions which defame and blemish the good name of Poland, and the minister is not going to fund it. So, it stays there. This sort of official lie is still very much part of the structure of Polish system of government.
Hi, first of all, thank you. Secondly, I want to ask now, realistic. If you go back now to 2017, you were out on the street and you also was trying to prevent what happened and the change of the re-elections and of the judges and everything. What can we do? What can we do now that you didn't do? Or when you look back, you said, this could have made things different.
Well, first of all, although I believe that most depends on civil society, the way civil society acts also is very much a function of political parties and of party elites. And I'm thinking about Polish opposition, which have been completely inept, which was incapable of acting in any sort of loyal collaboration with each other, which was ruled by personal ambitions, and in particular by dislike of leaders of smaller opposition parties against the de facto leader of the opposition, Donald Tusk. It is their fault. If Polish opposition loses if peace, which is Polish acronym for law and justice, retains its power, it can be largely blamed on the opposition. So that's one answer. But another answer is, when I came to Israel a few days ago, my constant question was, how did you people manage to sustain the protest week after week after week for 24 weeks now, with 120,000 or more people every Saturday go out of the street? Because I'm sure there will be many books, sociological books, written about it pretty soon, because it is sort of unsustainable. At least theoretically, it cannot happen. You cannot have that degree of sustained, enduring mobilization. So we had, for example, in Poland at the end of 2020, huge women's protests against this horrible anti-abortion judgment of so-called Constitutional Tribunal, which basically delegalized for all practical purposes all abortion in Poland. The women went out of the street. Well, it ran for 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Then it was end of October. Then Christmas time, it became cold. Christmas time came, and it sometime receded. But maybe then people say, well, because it's like a single issue protest. It's not a fundamental, generalized protest. It's protest about one item, even though it's a very important item. So were the protests in 2017, to which you alluded, against the 3 laws which basically dismantled judicial independence. Okay, but for some people also it was like a single issue. For many people, all these slogans about judicial independence sounded abstract, you know. So I even noticed in one of my talks in Poland, I said, well, when you talk about, you know, judicial independence, people start yawning. You know, much better is to shout when we were in front of the presidential palace, you'll understand it in Polish, będziesz siedział, which means lock him up. You know, it's a much better slogan than a slogan, how about National Council of Judiciary, you know. But somehow it worked in Israel. And I don't know, it's a mystery. It's a miracle and it's a mystery. Was it?
Allow me, sir, to thank you for your very interesting lecture. My question to you is very simple. You, as an outsider who looks things from above, do you see a linkage to Netanyahu's court cases?
I'm sure there are, but again, you know, I have a principle. I'm not going to dispense my wisdom on people who know 100 times more than I do about their country. I came here 2 days ago. I'm not going to behave like those American constitutional scholars who, after the fall of communism, which come from Harvard or here to Poland, they spent 2 days and they knew everything about how to repair Polish constitution. So no, it's not that I don't want to interfere. I just have to recognize my limitations, my cognitive limitations, to live this way.
Thank you very much for your talk. I'm just thanking you, and I want to ask a question. Yes. It was very interesting and quite frightening, what you told us. I want you to ask you, you gave us a glance during your speech, your talk, about your personal harassment or persecution. If you could elaborate it a little more.
It's not too interesting, really. I mean, because you know, there is always a temptation of falling into self-pity or into narcissism, and although I'm vain, I try to avoid this. But let me just say, I had 3 cases which came to court, because I had altogether, I think, 5 indictments and civil actions against me, but only 3 ended in court. 2 were by Polish governmental TV, TVP. One was criminal defamation, which exists on books in Poland. Another was civil defamation. And one was civil defamation by Law and Justice Party. And you know, they had maybe some reason. I don't want to have. I hope that no one will tell them. You know, I called peace that they act like an organized criminal organization, and I compared TVP to Goebbelsian media because they are like that. Anyway, I've won 2 cases definitely, going all the way up to Supreme Court. And basically all judgments were in my favor, and they were beautiful judgments quoting directly the Constitution, but also European Convention of Human Rights. And 1 case is still pending, so maybe I shouldn't talk too much about it. But the civil defamation case by TVP is still at this stage before the first instance judgment. So it's now 3rd year that it is pending, and I'm waiting.
We have time for one last question.
So thank you. This was extremely interesting and illuminating. And I want to ask, you gave a few reasons in order for us to understand where this is coming from, the crisis, in order to understand the people who are voting for populists, etc. You did not mention between these reasons something that is inherently perhaps wrong, if that's your opinion, with the liberal order itself. Can you perhaps relate to the liberal order and say what is the reason in its essence for the crisis that we see worldwide right now?
Yeah, of course, we liberal Democrats, if I may use this, encompass all of us into this first person plural. We liberal Democrats. We cannot have this self-satisfaction and also a sense of self-pity. We are so good, we had no faults, etc., and then something horrible happened to us, just as we should avoid the other extreme of self-flagellation. Saying, oh no, we have brought it up on ourselves, they were all only mistakes. But I think if I'm looking at published case study, because every country would have their different cases, I think that the faults, the deficits of liberal democracy in Poland before 2015 were multiple. First of all, a degree of corruption, much lower than it's here, but still, corruption is something that populists exploit very, very well. Secondly, arrogance. You know, that was a second consecutive term of office of civic platform. They became sort of arrogant. You know, they became really quite separated from the day-to-day emotions of people. They didn't understand people who are less educated and less affluent. And finally, I think more generally, liberal democracy around the world became sort of like stale, became non-innovative. With the general crisis of political parties, of parliaments, and of parliamentary governmental system, we weren't good enough in trying to find any democratic innovations, such as, I don't know, citizens' juries, various other forms of participatory and direct democracy. We simply dismissed all these as fantasy, and in the end, liberal democracy became, I think stale is the only word I can think of. So, you know, this is an immediate list of three. Corruption, arrogance, and lack of innovation, institutional innovation, which come to my mind immediately.
Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you very much.
כן, אנחנו יוצאים עכשיו להפסקה עד שעה 3:30. נחזור מיד אחרי זה לפרשן של שיחות על משברים חוקתיים. זאת תהיה ההפסקה האחרונה עכשיו, אז